How is Elon Musk able to disrupt so many industries, build so many companies, and just be so successful in general? What is his way of thinking? What is his secret sauce? Today we look at the fourth post from Tim Urban. This one is about the way of thinking. In the first three parts, we looked at the reasons behind the building of Tesla and SpaceX and other companies. Today, we look at how it is possible, how Musk is able to do what he's doing. Tim argues that if it would just be the money or intelligence or ambition of Musk, then there would be way more people that achieve so much. The missing part is what TED curator Chris Anderson calls the secret sauce. This secret sauce is not just available to Musk, it's actually available to all of us. So what is that? Tim begins by describing that there's two kinds of geologists. Basically, he says that Christian people used to believe that there was a big flood because it was said so by the Bible. But then there were new people looking at this problem or this issue, and they were called scientists. Rather than the Christians, the scientists didn't have any rules to work with. They just started with a blank sheet of paper and then thought about what makes sense here. New scientific methods allowed to look at elements in rocks where they found out that the Earth is actually billions of years old, not just 6,000 as the Bible says. And then this led to the theory of continental drift and the theory of plate tectonics. So over time, it got clearer and clearer that the Earth is not 6,000 years old. There was not this big flood written in the Bible, but some held strong, and today there are still flood geologists that believe that. And Tim says that the readers of Wait But Why probably are mostly thinking like the science geologists, or at least that's what we would like to think about ourselves. But he says that when he really thought about it, he came to the conclusion that for most of the way we think, actually, we still think much more like the flood geologists than the scientists. And Tim explains that Elon Musk is a science geologist in all of his life, in all of his decisions. The first big thing he says is that he thinks about humans kind of like as computers who have a hardware and a software. We as humans have the hardware, which is the physical element, and then we have the software, which is the way we think. And Tim says that for Musk, the hardware is probably really impressive, but what is almost more interesting is the software he uses, the way he thinks. Because when we look at the way he thinks, we can actually learn something for our own lives. So he basically says that in the world, there are things that someone wants, and then there's reality. And the intersection of those are the goal pool. So this is what one can achieve. And then if you know the goal you have in life, then you have to figure out a strategy. But this itself is not revolutionary yet. This is not the reason why Musk is so successful in his thinking. The reason is how he uses those elements. So the first thing he does right is that he builds each of these software components, if you think about it like that, up from the ground by himself. And the first thing is that he reasons from first principles. So he looks at the ground truths that are underlying all of his arguments, and then from there he reasons upwards. And then the second thing he does is once he has those components built, he constantly questions them and keeps them updated with new information. To explain this, he says that when we look at math, we have axioms and we have proofs. So, for example, there are two givens here. These are the axioms that A is B and B is C plus D. And then we can conclude that A is C and D. And we can prove that. But in science, this is different. In science generally, this is not true. And as a good example, he says that the Newton's law of universal gravitation couldn't be seen as a proof because it looked correct at that time, but it's not sure 100% that this is the ground truth. So Newton's law of universal gravitation is not a proof or an axiom, it's a hypothesis. And this hypothesis can be tested with different experiments. And if it can stand a lot of tests, then it's upgraded to a theory. But a scientific theory is also not 100% exact or 100% sure. So in this example, Newton's law seemed like it's right, but then Einstein came with the general relativity, and suddenly we saw that Newton's law of universal gravitation is not 100% correct. It's partly correct, but actually the more correct thing is the general relativity. And then even that is not a proof, it's just a theory, because then we look at quantum mechanics, Then we look at quantum mechanics, and then we see in the really small scales of this universe, the general relativity doesn't work. So we need new theories, new explanations for that. So not even the general relativity was a proof, it was just a theory. And then, of course, also quantum mechanics is not a proof, it's a theory again. So this can go on for forever, basically. We don't know where this could lead us or where this could end. And Tim says basically in science, it's more like there is a given, it seems, based on what I know, A is B. Then there's another given, it seems, based on what I know, B is C plus D. Therefore, it seems, based on what I know, A is C plus D. So all the givens must be tested all the time. And then if we have new data, we have to update our model. So if we incorporate that in our software structure, then we have a new field up there, which is that the strategy is executed, then we get feedback, and then we adjust the strategy due to our experience. When we do that, then maybe also what we want can change over time. So every now and then we have to reflect, the person is changing, and we adjust what we even want. Tim calls that evolution. And then the reality part here is not really reality of the universe, it's a model of reality in your head. So when the other things change, also this changes. Because you learn and the world changes in your mind through education, and you adjust this reality sector as well. So all of these things are constantly evolving. And then lastly, when the want and reality boxes change, which is kind of like how the goals are formulated in your head, then also the goal pool changes. So which goal you even want to achieve. So also that needs to be updated constantly over time. So all of this is constantly evolving and constantly, hopefully, improving. It's a living, breathing system, and it should be based on first principles thinking, and then hopefully it serves the owner very well. So with this goal finding and goal achieving structure, let's look at how Elon built his life. So it starts with the want box. Elon was slowly filling in the want box, and there is a good quote from him. I was at one point thinking about doing physics as a career, but in order to really advance physics these days, you need the data. Personally, I think that engineering is better because in the absence of the engineering, you do not have the data, just hit a limit. Like, look at Galileo. He engineered the telescope. That's what allowed him to see that Jupiter had moons. The limiting factor, if we will, is the engineering. And if you want to advance civilization, you must address the limiting factor. Therefore, you must address the engineering. Then in college, he thought hard about the first principles question of what will be most impactful for the future of humanity. And he put together a list of 5 things: the internet, sustainable energy, space exploration, artificial intelligence, and reprogramming the human genetic code. And he always liked super advanced technology. So then it would make sense that he would go in some engineering career. But actually first he went to a PhD program at Stanford. Tim says it's because the reality box was not developed that well by that time. But it was 1995 and the internet had started to spread a lot. And so the reality box changed a lot for Musk, and then also the goal box changed a lot. And in the end, he quit the Stanford program after 2 days, and he started a company with his brother, which was called Zip2. 4 years later, he sold the company, and he was suddenly a dot-com millionaire with $22 million. So following that, his want box suddenly was having a lot of crazy ideas. And then also on the reality box, he had the money to do those things, really. So in the end, he started X.com, and he had the vision of building a full-service online financial institution, which at that time was something totally new and not seen before. So instead of taking his 22 million and relaxing at some island, he started a new venture, and in the end, it was sold to eBay. It was called PayPal, and Elon Musk made $180 million out of that personally. Then the common logic would say, yeah, you're an internet millionaire, you should just keep doing those kind of things. But Musk didn't care about what the common logic would be. So he went back to his earlier thinking and his desire to help the future of humanity. And as he thought that humanity should be way better at space travel, also to ensure a good future, he in the end started SpaceX. 2 years later, he got to know Tesla, and in the end, he invested a lot of money in it and also became CEO and started to build that company up. And even 2 years after that, started another company with his cousins called Solar City, which is now incorporated into Tesla itself. So that's what software structure of Elon brought him in his life up until the point of this post in 2015. But let's look at what most people's software actually looks like. Tim says as babies and young children, we want to learn a lot of things and always ask the question, why? He calls it the why game, but it always gets shut down by parents or by teachers or by someone else with phrases like, because I said so. And that's then the end of the question round. So he says that, and that our education system is basically built for the industrial age. Those two things kill the creativity of people. And he says that creativity is needed for this first principles thinking. So he basically says that most people are not really able to think for themselves, because the critical and creative thinking is shut down already as a child. And then also due to the education system, we tend to just obey the leader because that's what is needed for the industrial age. Plus, what we learn in school is a lot of times quite old and outdated. So the career selection software here basically says the want is security. The reality is that everything is super scary. And then what you should want is to be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or a corporate leader. And then the strategies don't get fired. What is underlying all of this is a thinking that is not based on your own thoughts and not based on actual data. And Tim says that exactly is dogma. So X is true because some kind of authority says so. And he brings up quite a lot of examples like professor says so, the media says so, my opinionated friends say so, and on and on and on. But in the end, you should be thinking about it critically, and that should be the reason, not some authority. And this gets amplified when we are in a group. Tim calls it the tribes. So he defines tribe as a group of people that have something in common, like a religion, an ethnicity, family, philosophy, democratic party, or similar. And he says that tribalism can also be good, but there's a big difference. It depends on how the individual is related to the tribe. If the individual is in the tribe because his individuality fits the tribe, then it can be a good tribe. But if he has the identity of the tribe because he's in the tribe, then it's a bad tribe. And he calls the good tribe the conscious tribalism and the bad one a blind tribalism. And in real life, it's not black and white, it's a spectrum. But he says that blind tribalism, the problem there is that they claim that they are independent thinkers, but in reality, it's like this. They have the confidence of the mathematicians, but they have a given because the tribe says so. Then they have another given because the tribe says so. And then the conclusion is, with certainty, this. But the background of this is just because the tribe says so, not because it's logic. The problem with these tribes is that they remove the pressure to form independent thinking people. And he describes that because of group dynamics, these tribes have a very strong feeling of us, and this feeling even makes the bad things even worse. And yeah, so it's very strong. But now the problem is that if we are honest to us, then we are in a lot of areas a lot more like the tribal people than we would like to think. And to differentiate between thinking like this and thinking like Musk, thinking like a scientist, Tim introduces two different types of thinkers, the cook and the chef. These two concepts are very important to understand because in Tim's thinking and understanding of the way Musk is thinking, these two are very different, and these really determine if someone thinks like a creator, like an inventor, like someone that does something, really thinks through it from the ground up, or someone that just does things like they have been done in the past and like others are also doing. So first, going into the cooking analogy, he says that when he speaks of a chef, he really thinks of a chef who invents new recipes, and everyone else that is just following recipes is a cook. The chef knows all of his ingredients inside and outside, and that's how he can create new dishes. The cook, on the other hand, is doing what has already been done in some version or another by someone else already. For Tim, it's important to understand that this is not black and white, but this is actually a spectrum. And for example, he says that most people are cooks, and then there are some chefs that are 100% recipe creators. And he says that being a cook is also nothing wrong, because you don't always need to invent new things. So for most people, it's fine, and for most people, it's not even their goal to invent new things all the time. And then he also says that on a normal day, cooks and chefs don't really operate that much differently. They do their things, they do their tasks. It's not that much difference. But then when the day comes where they have to figure something new out, then the real difference shows. The chef, on the one hand, he switches on the active decision-making part of his software and he goes to work. He really digs into the problem, he understands it from the ground up, and then he tries some first version of the recipe and cooks it and does it, repeats it a lot and tries to improve something every time. And at some point, he's satisfied with the outcome. He's satisfied with the recipe. And then he goes back to autopilot mode where he just cooks the stuff. The cook, on the other hand, looks at what he already knows or where he can go, to what kind of authority he can go. He goes through his collection of recipes written by some outside authority, and then he just works them through step by step. He does that by maybe first asking his friends what they think about that, and then don't just use that to incorporate these kind of thinking steps in his own thinking, but he just takes them as they are from their friend. Or if nothing else works, he actually goes back to conventional wisdom. And Tim says if society as a whole would be a tribe, then the conventional wisdom would be like its guiding dogma cookbook. So the biggest difference is really that the chef thinks for himself. He really thinks all the way through all the steps for himself. And to sum up this definition of a chef, I have another quote here. Sometimes the chef is the one brave enough to go for something big. Other times, the chef is the one with the strength of character to step out of the game and in favor of keeping it small. Being a chef isn't being like Elon Musk, it's being yourself. Now, Tim goes on to explain that we often perceive this spectrum wrong, because in reality, most of the people are cooks and then there is some chefs. But we often perceive it as there are some followers, some cooks, and most of us are chefs. Tim says that firstly, we mistake ourselves of being too independently thinking. And then also we overestimate people like Musk and think that they are some kind of super genius, when in reality he just does actual independent reasoning. So he brings 3 examples where we think people like Musk are some kind of genius or some kind of magicians, when in reality they just do actual independent thinking. First is when we mistake a vision for the future with just a clear view of the present. He says that we perceive Musk like this normal reality box, things that are possible today. So how we see what is possible today. And then Elon's magical reality box, things that will be possible in the future. So he kind of knows what is possible in the future. It's very magical. But what it actually is that this is the conventional wisdom's reality box, things that were possible 10 to 50 years ago. So it's outdated. And this is Elon Musk's normal reality box, things that are possible today. So he just sees the present in a very clear way. And we think that it's some magical future vision, but actually it's just reality right now. Second example is that we think Musk is very courageous, when in reality he just has an accurate understanding of risk. A quote from Musk is, sometimes people fear starting a company too much. Really, what's the worst that could go wrong? You're not going to starve to death. You're not going to die of exposure. What's the worst that could go wrong? And example number 3 is that we think people like Musk or Steve Jobs have brilliant ingenuity, when in reality they just have originality. So when you don't reason by analogy, but really do first principles thinking, magical things can happen. And he brings an example of Steve Jobs and Apple. They turned their attention to phones and they simply asked, what should a mobile device be? They didn't take a phone and say, how can we make the keyboard better? But they asked, what should a mobile device be? And then they came up with a reasoning from scratch without any preconditions, and the physical keyboard just didn't end up in the plan at all. And then that's how the iPhone was born, perceived as a really innovative thing, but in the end it was also just logical. So Tim says that Musk's secret is nothing magical, it's just really thinking from the ground up, thinking from first principles. And he says that that's Elon Musk's secret sauce, and that's the reason why the real story here isn't Musk, it's us. The real puzzle is why Elon Musk is so rare. Why do not more people think like Elon Musk? So now we come to the last and maybe most important chapter, how to be a chef. I very much recommend everyone to read this whole chapter, but I will just say the 3 most important rules to live by. He calls it epiphanies, so revelations. The first thing to remind yourself is that you don't know shit. Tim says that when you look in the history, people lived in a lot of different false systems of beliefs, false dogmas. But he says that actually the most dangerous thing is not to be ignorant, but that you think you know everything already. Or as Stephen Hawking puts it, the greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance, it is the illusion of knowledge. Tim says a good test for yourself, if you are thinking ignorantly or not, is to play the why game that we talked about earlier until you hit the floor. When you hit the floor, then you check if the reasoning here is really from first principles, then you know that you're working like a scientist from first principles. But if the reasoning on the floor is because some authorities say so, then you know that maybe you think more like the Christians back in the days where they thought the flood was happening 6,000 years ago. To illustrate the point, Tim says that the reasoning step of the Christians were like this, they were all correct. And then there is one step in the reasoning that says, we know the earth began no further back than 6,000 years ago. And from there on, they just keep on building on false assumptions. And then the conclusion is obviously wrong. But if you find out that this step might be wrong, then you can come to the accurate conclusion. So the first thing to remember is you don't know shit. And this is actually a step of humility. Tim says that this is necessary as a starting point to work like in a science lab. Then the second one is no one else knows shit either. Tim brings the example of the Emperor's New Clothes from Hans Christian Andersen, and he makes it in a very funny way, so I recommend you guys look at it. But I will go at it with a quote from Steve Jobs. When you grow up, you tend to get told the world is the way it is, and your life is just to live your life inside the world. Try not to bash into the walls too much. Try to have a nice family life, have fun, save a little money. That's a very limited life. Life can be much broader once you discover one simple fact, and that is everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it, you can influence it, you can build your own things that other people can use. Once you learn that, you'll never be the same. So what Steve Jobs here says in a very optimistic way, Tim puts in a maybe more pessimistic way, which is you might not know shit, but no one else knows shit either. Tim says this second reason, this second epiphany, is about confidence. Confidence because you might not know shit, but no one else knows shit either. And then epiphany number 3, which he calls you're playing Grand Theft Life. He calls it Grand Theft Life because he says that in reality, most people have way too much fear of taking risks. But he says that maybe sometimes you should treat life more like Grand Theft Auto, where you can just try a lot of different things and there's no real consequences. Because also in real life, most consequences are not that bad, actually. I like this quote here from Thomas Edison. I have not failed 700 times. I've succeeded in proving 700 ways how not to build a light bulb. And then Tim argues that this is exactly the science approach. It's all about learning through testing hypotheses, and hypotheses are built to be disproven, which means that scientists learn through failure. Failure is a critical part of their process. And Tim says that this is what Steve Jobs meant when he said, stay hungry, stay foolish. And this third epiphany is all about fearlessness. So, to conclude, there are 3 really important things. We should be more humble, we should be more confident, and we should be less afraid of things that don't matter. And Tim says, yeah, that sounds easy, but how do we actually do this in the real world? And then he says there are some things to remember. The first thing to remember is that we have software, and this software can be changed, it can be rewritten. Then that reasoning is a skill, and like any skill, you get better at it if you work on it and if you use that skill. And then lastly, it's always important to see the cook and chef distinction so that we can notice in which areas we are cooks and in which areas we are chefs. And with this, I hope that you learned a lot here. Let me know what you think of this post in the comments, and see you next time when we talk about another crazy company of Elon Musk, namely Neuralink. Bye bye.